Hi, welcome to transformations of a horizontal and vertical translation and y equals root x. So that's the horizontal and vertical translations on the square root function. Horizontal translations on the square root equation y equals root x. And the equation is y equals x plus or minus h. And so that gives me a mapping rule of x comma y, arrow, and notice the x is changing, so it's x plus or minus h comma y. So horizontal translation is affecting the x. So we have the equation y equals root x, and now we're going to look at the equation y equals the square root of x minus 1. Well, this is the basic equation, and that's a 0, 1, 4, 9, and we get a 0, 1, 2, 3. Take these numbers, plug it into this root, and we'll get these. And so we know that graph is 0, 0, 1, 1, 4, 2, and it's 9, 3. So again, there's the equation, and I keep repeating, this is the basic graph of the square root function, root x, and the domain is x is greater than or equal to 0, range is y is greater than or equal to 0. You can see it in the table, you can see it in the graph. The x's are moving to the right, and the y's are moving up in this graph. There's no x's to the left of 0, there's no y's below 0, negatives. So let's look at y equals x minus 1. So we know, or should know, that in a square root we cannot have a negative underneath the root. So if I put a 0 in this equation right here, in this root, I'll get a negative 1, so I can't put a 0 in. What happens if I put a 1 in? So if I put a 1 in, I get a 1 gives me the square root of 1 minus 1. The square root of 0 is 0. If I put a 2 in, the square root of 2 minus 1 is the square root of 1, which is 1. So, but if I put a 3 in, I get a root 2. That's an irrational number. Let's put, what number will I put in? Well, let's try a 5. 5 minus 1. So 5 minus 1 gives me the root of 4, which is 2. And before we had a 9, but now I have to get a 9, I have to put a 10 in. 10, because 10 minus 1 is the root of 9, which is 3. So notice we're putting in one more than what we had over here, because we've got to subtract 1. Another way to look at that is to x minus 1 equals 0. That means x equals 0 plus 1, x is 1. And if we put in x minus 1 equals 1, what does that give us? That's 1 plus 1, x is 2. So when I put a 2 in, I get a 1 back, perfect. And we go x minus 1 equals 4. X equals 4 plus 1, x is 5. Again, when I put a 5 in and take 1 off, I get the 4 back, which is just works out to be square root of 4 is 2. And if x minus 1 equals 9, x is 9 plus 1, x is 10. And again, 10 will give me a 9, which gives me a root 3. So notice we're adding x minus 1. We're adding one number on because we have to take it, we have to subtract it. So that means that if you look at it, x is 1, y is 0. X is 1, y is 0. X is 2, y is 1. X is 2, y is 1. X is 5, y is 2. X is 5, y is 2. And when x is 10, y is 3. So there's the same graph, only notice in this we're going plus or minus the h. So we're adding on 1. So if we're adding on 1, then it's x plus 1 is your mapping rule. The y's are not changing because it's affecting the x. So it's a, notice, it's an x, this is an x minus 1. So we have to do the opposite, like in the parabola with the vertex in a bracket. Because this is inside the root, I treat it as the same as if we had a parabola where we had a bracket like this. So if I had a parabola, the vertex would have been 1, 0. So this bracket being squared, this root is acting as the same as the bracket, so it's the opposite. So we're adding 1 on. And the domain is the same. X is greater than or equal to 0. The range, wait now. The domain starts at 1. So that means x minus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. Over here, it's x is greater than or equal to 0. Now it's x minus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. That means x is greater than or equal to 0 plus 1. X is greater than or equal to 1. So it starts at 1. This graph starts at 1. Again, you can look at it this way. Make whatever's underneath the root, let it be greater than or equal to 0 and solve it. And you'll get the domain. So x is greater than or equal to 1 is the domain. Because the x values start at 1 and move to the right. And the y values not change. So y is greater than or equal to 0. So just be careful. The domain changed here. And let's look at the equation. Y equals the square root of x plus 1. So it's an x plus 1 underneath the root. So that means that the mapping rule, again, that's a plus 1. So it's an x minus 1, comma y. The opposite. X plus 1, x minus 1. So that means we're taking 1 off. If you put a 0 in here, you get a 1. But if you put a negative 1 in, you get a 0, and the square root of 0 is 0. If you put a 0 in, you'll get a 1, and the square root of 1 is 1. Again, what we're doing, we're going x plus 1 equals 0. X is 0 minus 1, negative 1. X plus 1 equals 1. So x equals 1 minus 1, so x is 0. And we go x plus 1 equals 4. So that means x equals 4 minus 1. X is equal to 3. And x plus 1, whatever's underneath the root, let it be each one of these numbers. So if you let x plus 1 equal each one of these numbers, then you'll come up with the right number to work out what you want. So x is 8. Again, look, if you put negative 1 in this equation, you'll get a 0. So the square root of 0 is 0. Put a 0 in this equation, you get a 1. The square root of 1 is 1. Put a 3 in this equation. Put a 3 here. Take x is 3. You get a 4. Square root of 4 is 2. Put an 8. 8 plus 1 is 9. Square root of 9 is 3. So notice it's x plus 1. It's 1 less to give you the 0. So the starting point is negative 1, 0. The next one is 0, 1. Next one is 3, 2. And the next point is 8, 3. So notice that the y's never changed, but the x's went. So the x's are, notice this equation, we have, just look at this equation, we have x plus 1 is greater than or equal to 0. So therefore x is greater than or equal to negative 1. So the x values start at 1. Start at negative 1. Negative 1 right here will give you a 0. That's where it starts at. 0 square root of 0 is 0. So what number will give you 0? Negative 1. And the range didn't change. Y is greater than or equal to 0. So note, the horizontal is you're changing the sign. Whatever this is, you're changing the sign. So x minus 1, it starts at 1. X plus 1, it starts at negative 1. This is the opposite sign. And what about a vertical translation? That means it's moving up or down. Oh, sorry. Let's go back to what I just had, just for a second. Notice x minus 1 is the mapping rule is an x plus 1, so it's moved 1 to the right. Notice this is x plus 1. The mapping rule is x minus 1, so it moves to the left. So it's the opposite. Negative 1, 1 left. Plus 1, it moved 1 right. It's the opposite. So notice the x. The x is reciprocal in the stretch and is the opposite in the translation. What about the vertical? The vertical translation. Y is root of x plus or minus k. So the mapping rule is x is not changed, but it's a plus or minus being added to the k. Y equals root x plus or minus k. So it's moving it up and down. So y equals root x, basic equation for the square root, 0, 1, 4, 9, 0, 1, 2, 3. And again, do it so often. I have it memorized now, exactly what I got to do. There it is. That's the basic graph, basic equation. There's the basic graph. Domain is greater than or equal to 0 for x. The range is greater than or equal to 0 for the y. Let's look at if we go y equals root x and we add 1. So k is 1 in this case. So what happens? So notice the x is x, that's root x. That's root x. The x values are not changing. 1, 4, and 9. Put a 0 in. Square root of 0 is 0. 0 plus 1 is 1. Put a 1 in. Square root of 1 is 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. Put a 4 in. Put a 4. Square root of 4 is 2. 2 plus 1 is 3. Take a 9, sub it in. Square root of 9 is 3. 3 plus 1 is 4. So notice the y values, the x's are not changed. The y, you're adding 1 to the y value. That means this graph is moving up. So 0 gives you 1. 1 gives 2. 4 gives you a 3. And a 9 gives a 4. So it's moved up. The x's are not changed, so the x's didn't change, but the y, it only moved. So notice the plus 1 stays. So with the vertical translation, it's what you have is what you write down. It's the horizontal translation that does the opposite. So this is graph is moved up 1. So domain is the same. Starts at 0, moves to the right, but the range, y is greater than or equal to 1. Y is greater than or equal to 1. So notice the y values, you have 1 more added onto it. Okay, so let's look at another equation. Y equals root x minus 1. So you're taking 1 off the y again. So there's no change in the x. And the mapping rule, there's no change in the x. You're adding 1, subtracting 1 from the y, so that's y minus 1. So what happens? The x's is 0, 1, 4, 9. And when you put a 0 in, take away 1, negative 1. Put a 1 in, square root of 1 is 1, 1 minus 1 is 0. Square root of 4 is 2, 2 minus 1 is 1. And when you put a 9 in, square root of 9 is 3. 3 minus 1 is 2. So notice the x's are the same as here, but the y's are 1 less because you're taking 1 off the y value. So 0 gives you negative 1. 1 gives you 0. 4, 1. 4, 1. 9, 2. So the graph, there it is. But compare the graphs. Note to the basic graph. Starts 0, 0, now it's starting at negative 1. So the domain is the same. The x's never changed, the x's, but the y's, you took off 1. So the y is greater than or equal to negative 1. Because you're subtracting 1 from the y. And that's the vertical translation, the horizontal translation. Notice the vertical translation, you're adding and subtracting from the y. The horizontal translation is the opposite, and you're dealing with the x. Click on the buttons if you like my video, and the subscribe button if you wish, notification bell. Visit my math website, www.mathfullyexplained.com, to find more information about me, my videos, and the content. That's on my YouTube channel called Math Fully Explained. Thank you for viewing my video.